Every human being on this planet has something in his life that he must be grateful for and that he must be thankful for. These things have been given to them either by nature as a blessing, or they have got those things from those people who love them, who care about them, and they didn't have to earn those things, and those things served them even at the lowest moments of their life. But human beings have this flaw within their nature that they are always focused on those things which they don't have. And this flaw emerges from our evolutionary nature. And I'm a very big proponent for detecting and analyzing the human behavior in terms of the evolutionary science, biology, and psychology. Because I believe that no matter what happens, the biological and the psychological instincts that the human beings have developed after hundreds and thousands of years of evolution has a far, far greater influence over the human nature than any political philosophy, any religious philosophy, or in general, any kind of moral standards of a society that we are a part of. So, in the evolutionary perspective, the survival instinct of every human being urges him to accumulate as many resources as he can so that he can ensure his survival as well as the survival of his offspring. Now, what happens is that with that kind of a mindset, when our ancestors were living in the forests and life was very uncertain at that moment, and people were not sure that whether they will get the meal of the afternoon and the night or not. At that moment, if 10 things were working favorably for them and the 11th thing was not working in their favor, all their focus was going to be on that 11th thing, because that panic, that depression, depression is a very modern term, but we can say that that panic and anxiety that got triggered because of the lack of resources in that one aspect were synonymous with death. So, in order to avoid death and avoid isolation, all the focus and all the concentration of our ancestors were filling the gap that has come within uh, the number of resources by actually solving that problem that they were facing at that particular time. And we still carry this survival instinct to this modern age of technology and democracy, where if 10 things are working in our favor, we don't care about them. But if the 11th thing is not working the way we want it to work, we increasingly become concerned about that particular thing and we want to solve that problem, and we consciously concentrate all our thinking and all our action on that particular thing to solve that problem, and we actually completely ignore the other 10 things which are working our way. So we still carry that anxiety and panic within us. So the survival instinct does not have any gratitude. It does not have any ability to thank or to become grateful for what is already in your life, but it is always looking towards those things which you don't have. Now, that's a survival instinct. Now, there is a subcategory of survival instinct which can be called as a competitive instinct. Now, human beings compete with each other for two reasons. Number one, winning at a competition can actually give them an advantage at accumulating as much resources as they can so that they can ensure their survival for long. On the other hand, they also want the limelight, they also want the social validation by winning. Now, that social validation and that external approval is actually connected with your ability to win. And as human beings, as social creatures, we want that social approval in order to feel validated and in order to feel that we are a part of a community and the community care about us. Because if the community does not care about you, that means that you will be socially isolated. And when you're socially isolated, that means you can be surrounded by the enemies and get killed. From an evolutionary point of view, I will say it again. So, in that perspective, winning becomes more important than celebrating all the work that you have done, all the difficulties that you have surpassed, everything that you have done in your life in order to get to that point where you have become eligible to compete for that thing. But those things doesn't matter because they're not going to serve that biological and psychological purpose. That is the main reason behind taking part in that competition, and that is to get the limelight, to get the resources, and to get the approval that we are looking for. Now, why does this behavior occur is another story. And we will just touch on it briefly by telling you that The competitive instinct, the ability to compete with other people, only gets triggered within human beings when we are trying to control an outcome which is not within our control. The results of that competition are not under our control. We only have 10 to 20% control over that outcome that we are trying to control. 80% of the control of that outcome is usually dependent upon other people. It is dependent upon those people or the other people's opinions or other people's actions or our environment, our surroundings, the nature. Everything is controlling that outcome. All we have is a 20% control over that outcome. And when you're trying to control the result and the probability of that outcome that is only 20% under your control, that's the biggest foolish move that you can make. And it is enough to make you frustrated and to make you quit. So at the end of the day, you must set the parameters of winning for yourself in terms of those outcomes that you can absolutely control. And you can only control two things. Number one, you can control your actions. Number two, you can control your decisions. And that's it. Everything which is happening in the outside world may have 100 other factors which are affecting that outcome, and they're not under your control. So stop controlling what you don't control. Work on those things which you do control. And when you start working on those things, there is one thing which happens. You start becoming grateful. Now, apparently there can be no match between these two things, but let me explain. Most of the times we have been fed by the literature of the personal development, which has been evolved in the last 100 years. If you go through it, what we find is that we are told and we are actually instructed to create a feeling of gratitude within us in order to create the outcome in the outer world. Now, I am not a big proponent for that because I don't believe that you can actually get something just by thinking about it. You must have a massive action plan which is going to get you there. So instead of creating that feeling within you in order to become grateful, which can be disastrous because you can create one feeling for one time and it is only going to feel excited once you do it for the first time. But again, when you want to do it, it is going to get more and more familiar, and when it becomes familiar, it is going to lose all its impact, all its thrill, all its vibe. And then even if you try to become grateful, you will not be able to do so because the feeling is gone. So when you are relying on your feelings, the human emotions are very inconsistent, they're fleeting. So when you are relying on something which is inconsistent in nature, you're a fool. And when you're a fool, the first thing that you should do is that you should stop being a fool. And for that, you must imitate the behaviors and the actions of a grateful person. And then you should act on them. And every person who feels grateful for the things that he has in his life is going to act in such a way that he's not going to focus on those things which he doesn't have, but he's going to focus on those things which he does have. Now, what do I mean by that? It means that if everything is taken away from him and he is focusing on those things which are not going great in his life, that means that he's thinking from a place of lack. He's thinking from a place of weakness because all of his focus is on that outcome which is not directly under his control. But a grateful person focuses on what he has. He can have very few resources at his disposal, but at the end of the day, his whole focus is going to be on those things which he has, and then he is going to dig them and extract the best tools available that he can use in order to move forward. Now, his movement can be slow, but it will be persistent. It will be consistent, and a day is going to come when that movement is going to create the outcome for him in such a way that his circle of influence is going to increase than his circle of concern, which means that he will be able to influence more things than he needs. His power, his influence will increase. And that only happens when you start becoming grateful and not just feeling grateful. Because the best way to move forward is to act forward, is to advance. Now, if you think that it is something that is a technique and you can use it whenever you want to use it, you're committing a very big mistake because that's not how these things work. If you really want to move ahead, The most important thing that you will have to do is that you will have to embrace the life of gratitude as a lifestyle. And you will have to deliberately and consciously and forcefully force yourself to adopt this mindset. And once you have this mindset, just imagine if you do it for 1 year. Right now, whenever you face a problem, you're always focusing on those things that you can control. After 1 year, forcing yourself, now your default response is always going to be that whenever you're going to encounter a problem, you're going to immediately focus on those things which you do have. And when you start focusing on those things, that's the time when you start changing your life. Because now you're not focusing on those things which you don't have. Now you're focusing on those things which you do have, and then you will expand on them, and by starting your journey from there. So whenever, even if you're starting from scratch, if your limbs are working well, if your mind is functioning well, if you can walk, if you can talk, if you can sit, if you have a roof over your head, if you have food over the table, these are more resources than a normal person can have, because most of the population do not have these things. So even if you have those things, and with the bonus point, you have people around you who love you and who care for you, you have a lot of resources. Now it's a time for you to become a resourceful person, a person who can move forward with even the less amount of resources that are available to him and that are at his disposal. So at the end of the day, what you should do is that when you have this kind of an attitude, what's going to happen is that no amount of adversity and difficulty will be able to take away your smile from your face. So keep smiling, stay grateful, and say thank you, even when you don't want to say, because there is always something in your life that you can be grateful for.